Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I used to think the forest was loud. Back when life was normal, I'd stand at the edge of the Hoh rainforest with a clipboard in my hand and complain about the noise, wind in the cedar tops, water pushing through gravel, ravens arguing over something I couldn't see. I worked for a private timber and environment outfit out of Forks, Washington, the kind of company that hired people like me to walk lines, check culverts, flag boundaries, and write reports no one read until there was a lawsuit. My title was field technician, which meant I was the person who showed up in the rain so the people in dry offices could point to data later. My truck was a white 2012 Ford F-250 with a canopy, yellow strobes on the roof, and a bed full of gear that made sense for my job. Hard hat, reflective vest, bear spray, a basic medical kit, a handheld radio that only reached as far as it could yell, and a notebook that smelled like wet paper for most of the year. I knew how to read a map without a signal. I knew which logging roads turned to mush after 3 days of steady rain. I knew that if you're cold and hungry, the forest doesn't care. I didn't know that one day the forest would be the only place that did. The first time I heard the word outbreak, it wasn't from a government alert or a siren. It was from Nadia, the cashier at the small grocery in Forks, when I stopped in for coffee and jerky before a day of boundary work. "You hear about Seattle?" she asked, sliding my change across the counter. I shrugged like I didn't care, like the city 200 miles away wasn't a separate world that didn't touch ours. "Another protest?" She shook her head. Nadia always looked like she was half a step away from laughing at a joke you hadn't heard. That morning she didn't. They shut down a hospital. People got sick, like violent sick. My cousin texted me. He said don't go anywhere near the emergency room. I took my coffee, still hot enough to burn my tongue, and I said the first thing that came to mind. "People get weird. That's Seattle." She didn't smile. "He said it's not like that. He said they bit people." I remember thinking, that's nonsense. I remember thinking it and then filing it away with all the other nonsense that floats around when the weather changes and the news needs something to chew on. By lunchtime, my phone was a brick, no bars. That wasn't unusual out on the roads, but the radio chatter was strange. Fragments of voices, county frequencies stepping over each other. Someone from the sheriff's office telling people to stay home. Keep doors locked. Don't travel unless you have to. I was on a spur road off Upper Hoh Road, deep enough that the trees swallowed the sky. The rain was steady, the kind of rain that doesn't fall in drops so much as it just exists. My boots sank into duff at the shoulder. I was checking a culvert inlet, measuring water depth, looking for debris, writing down notes about flow and erosion, when I heard an engine come up too fast behind me. A red SUV slid to a stop half on the road, half in the ditch. The driver's door flew open and a man spilled out, stumbling like his legs were learning how to work. He was in his 30s maybe, with a soaked hoodie and mud on his hands. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide in a way I'd seen on people who had been in wrecks. "Hey," I called, stepping back from the road, hand lifted. "You okay?" He turned his head slowly, like a sound had to travel through him before it made sense. When his eyes met mine, I felt something cold pass through my chest. Not fear, exactly. Something more basic. The part of the brain that recognizes when an animal is not acting like an animal. His mouth worked without words. His jaw hung wrong, slack, and there was a wet shine at the corner of his lips, like he'd been drooling for hours. His hands flexed, fingers curled, then uncurled, as if he couldn't decide what shape to be. "Sir," I said, steady and loud, "stay there. You need help?" He started toward me. I took 2 steps back, boots slipping on wet gravel. "Stop." He didn't. I remember details I wish I didn't. The way his shoes dragged, the way his head bobbed with each step as if his neck was too tired, the way his eyes didn't focus on my face so much as on the idea of me. I didn't have a gun on my hip. In the field, I carried bear spray because it was legal, it was non-lethal, and it was enough for the rare black bear that got curious. My company didn't want employees carrying firearms on the clock. Liability. So the spray rode in a holster on my belt. I yanked it free and pointed it at his face. "Stop!" I shouted again. He didn't stop. He sped up, like the word meant nothing. At 15 feet, I fired. Bear spray comes out in a thick orange cloud, a fog that clings and hangs. It's designed to hit a big animal's face and make it regret being alive for a while. I watched that cloud slam into him. I watched it coat his eyes and nose and mouth. He didn't react. Not a flinch, not a stumble, not even a blink. He barreled through it like it was just rain. That's when my brain finally accepted what Nadia had said. Not the word outbreak, not the rumors, the reality. Whatever was wrong with this man, it was not a normal kind of wrong. I ran. I ran up the slope on the side of the road, grabbing at salmonberry branches, boots scraping for traction. Behind me I heard his feet on gravel, faster than they should have been, and then the wet slap of boots in mud as he followed. I had a hard hat on my head, a radio clipped to my vest and a clipboard bouncing against my ribs. None of it mattered. What mattered was distance. The forest here was dense, a wall of moss and cedar and fern. Off the road, the ground dropped and rose in steep folds. I knew the terrain better than most people because I'd walked it for work. I also knew that in wet woods, one bad step could mean a broken ankle and a long, quiet death. I didn't have the luxury of being careful. I cut downhill toward the sound of water because water meant a creek bed, and a creek bed meant a line I could follow. I heard him crashing behind me. No caution, no awareness of footing, just forward motion. When I hit the creek, it was swollen and fast, brown with silt. A small log spanned it, slick and angled. I stepped onto it, arms wide, boots sliding. I crossed in 3 steps and dropped to the other side, hands catching on wet rocks. I spun around. He stepped onto the log without slowing. His boots slipped. His arms flailed, but not like a normal person trying to regain balance, more like something trying to copy the idea of balance. He fell sideways into the water with a loud splash and disappeared. The creek took him. For a second, I stood there, breathing hard, rain on my face, and I waited for him to pop up, coughing, swearing, human again. He didn't. The water surged, carrying branches and foam. I watched for movement. Nothing. I should have turned and sprinted back to my truck and driven straight to town. I should have gotten on the radio and told someone, anyone, what I'd seen. Instead, I stood there with my chest heaving, and I listened. There were other sounds in the forest now, not just wind and water and birds. Far off, somewhere beyond the trees, I heard a faint screaming that cut through everything else, thin and ragged, like someone's voice tearing itself apart. Then it stopped. Then, from another direction, a single gunshot echoed, one sharp crack swallowed by rain. Then another. Then nothing again. I didn't go back to my truck. That choice probably saved my life. I moved deeper into the forest, away from the road, away from the direction of that screaming, following the creek upstream until the road noise vanished entirely. My radio hissed with static. I tried calling in anyway, thumb on the push to talk. "Forks Base, this is Field Unit 3, I said, using the company's old call sign out of habit. I need... Static swallowed my words. I changed channels, spun the dial. Sheriff frequency, Forest Service, State Patrol. A few voices cut in and out, broken like bad reception. Don't let them in. Bridge is blocked. If you have family, stay together." Then nothing but hiss. By late afternoon, I was soaked through and shaking. My hands were numb and my head felt like it was full of cotton. I'd eaten half my jerky. I had water around me, but drinking straight from a swollen creek is a fast track to illness, even when the world isn't ending. I carried a small filter straw and chlorine tablets in my pack because fieldwork teaches you to plan for stupid mistakes. I used the filter, then treated the water anyway, because fear makes you cautious in strange ways. I found a place to shelter under an old cedar blowdown. The trunk lifted off the ground like a roof. I cleared out wet debris and ferns, laid down a contractor trash bag I kept for keeping gear dry, and sat with my back against wood that smelled like earth and time. I checked my phone until the battery died completely. No service, no texts, no emergency alert, nothing. Just rain and my own breathing and the knowledge that something had changed in a way I couldn't unchange. When the light faded, the forest turned into a tunnel of dark shapes. In the distance, I heard faint movement, branches snapping, something walking through undergrowth. I froze. A normal deer makes noise, an elk makes noise, even a black bear, for all it's quiet, has a rhythm to it. This sound was wrong, too steady, too purposeful, and yet clumsy. I held my breath and listened. It came closer, slow, dragging, like boots through mud. I didn't have a weapon. Bear spray was empty. My knife was a folding utility blade meant for cutting flagging tape and opening packages. I had a hatchet in my pack, small and sharp, for clearing brush when needed. I took it out and held it close, knuckles white. The sound paused. Then I heard a low, wet noise, something like a cough that never finished. Through the curtain of rain, a figure stumbled into view between the ferns about 30 feet away. It was a woman. At least it had been. Her hair hung in wet ropes, and her jacket was torn open. She moved like the man earlier, unbalanced, head bobbing. Her face was turned slightly to one side, and I could see that her eyes were open but unfocused, as if the world was a blur she didn't care to sharpen. She stopped near the creek and tilted her head down, mouth opening and closing slowly. Not drinking, not looking for shelter, just existing. I stayed perfectly still under the blowdown, rain dripping off the bark onto my shoulders, hatchet ready. After a long minute she turned and wandered away, pushing through ferns without any caution, leaving a trail of snapped stems. I didn't sleep much that night. Morning came grey and cold. My teeth chattered until I forced myself to move. Squats, arm circles, anything to bring blood back into my fingers. I packed quickly, shoulders aching, and I made a decision. I couldn't go back to Forks. Even if it was safe, even if nothing had reached it yet, the roads were narrow and limited. The Olympic Peninsula is beautiful, but it's also a trap if you're trying to move fast when everyone else is trying to do the same. And I didn't have a clear picture of what was happening. I'd seen 2 infected people and heard distant chaos. That could mean a local incident, or it could mean something far bigger already rolling over everything I knew. The forest, on the other hand, was something I understood. The woods didn't need power lines. It didn't need grocery stores. It didn't need crowds. If you had the right gear, the right skills, and the right luck, you could disappear into it and let the storm pass. So I went deeper. The Hoh River Valley stretches like a spine into the heart of Olympic National Park. The land is protected, which means there are fewer logging spurs, fewer houses, fewer people. It also means trails, camps, and the kind of backcountry infrastructure that assumes hikers will be polite and leave before winter. Polite hikers don't exist anymore. Around mid-morning, I reached a maintained trail junction, a wooden sign half covered in moss, pointing toward the Hoh River Trail and out toward the visitor area. I didn't go toward the visitor area. I went the other way, toward the interior. I followed the trail until my legs burned, then left it and climbed uphill into thicker cover, aiming for a ridgeline I knew from map work. Higher ground meant better visibility, less chance of being surprised. It also meant colder wind and harder travel, but I chose discomfort over surprise. By afternoon, the rain eased into a fine mist. The forest smelled cleaner, sharper. I came across an old, abandoned backcountry campsite, flat ground, fire ring made of stones. a fallen signpost that had once held rules about packing out trash. Someone had been there recently. I could tell because the fire ring wasn't overgrown. There were boot prints in the mud, fresh enough that the edges hadn't softened. A crushed aluminum can lay half buried near a log, too shiny to have been there long. My stomach tightened. People meant danger in two ways now. The infected were one kind, the uninfected, desperate and frightened, were another. I circled the site carefully, scanning the trees. That's when I heard the click, metal on metal, soft but unmistakable. "Don't move," a voice said. It was a man's voice, steady, not shaking. Military calm, without the theatrics. I froze, hands open, hatchet hanging at my side. "I'm not looking for trouble," I said slow. "I'm alone." "Turn around," the voice said. I did, slowly. A man stood 10 yards away between two hemlocks, rain beading on the brim of a dark baseball cap. He held a rifle in a low ready position, pointed at my chest, not shaking, not sloppy, the kind of hold that said he'd practiced. He was in his 40s, with a trim beard and a weathered face. He wore a green rain jacket and a backpack that looked like it had been on a lot of trails. At his feet, half hidden behind him, was a young woman, maybe 20, clutching a hiking pole like a spear. The man's eyes flicked over me. Vest, hard hat, radio, pack. He read me fast like I'd read maps for years. "Who are you?" he asked. "Eli Mercer," I said. "Field tech. I was working out here when things went bad." The young woman's eyes widened at the word bad, like she wanted to call it something else. The man nodded once. "I'm Tom. That's my daughter, June." June didn't speak. Her knuckles were white on the pole. Tom lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't put it away. "You see any of them?" "Two," I said. "Yesterday. One in the road, one near the creek last night." June made a small sound, half a gasp, half a swallow. Tom's jaw tightened. "They came through our neighborhood, outside Port Angeles. We left before it got trapped. Roads are not good." Port Angeles was bigger than Forks, closer to the highway routes. If it was compromised, then whatever was happening wasn't small. "Where are you headed?" I asked. Tom looked up at the trees, as if the canopy might answer. "Away." I nodded. "Same." We stood there in the wet quiet, three strangers in a forest that suddenly felt like a narrow hallway. Tom finally lowered the rifle fully and kept it pointed toward the ground. "You got food?" "Some," I said. "Not much." "Water?" "I can treat water," I said. "Filter and tablets." Tom's expression softened a fraction. "We have food, not a lot, but more than we want to carry alone." I understood what he was saying. He was offering partnership because partnership meant more eyes, more hands, more chances to notice danger before it touched you. It also meant trusting strangers, which in a collapse is a gamble you might not get to repeat. June finally spoke, voice low. "Are you sick?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not sick." Tom watched my face, as if looking for cracks. "Any injuries?" "Nothing serious." He nodded again. "Okay, we walk together for now." That's how it started. Not with speeches or promises. Just a mutual decision that the woods were big, but fear made them smaller. We moved that day until late evening, keeping off major trails, using game paths and old service routes. Tom had a paper map in a plastic sleeve and a compass clipped to his jacket. That earned immediate respect from me. Paper doesn't die when towers do. He'd been a paramedic for 20 years, he told me, most of it in Clallam County. He'd seen car wrecks, overdoses, logging accidents, heart attacks in grocery aisles. He'd seen people at their worst, and he'd learned how to stay functional in chaos. June was a community college student. She'd been home for the weekend. She had hiking experience, but not survival experience, and it showed in the way she flinched at every snap of a branch. They had left in a hurry, grabbed backpacks, first aid supplies, food from the pantry, Tom's rifle and a handgun he didn't mention by name. and June's sleeping bag. They'd walked away from their truck when the road clogged with abandoned vehicles near the edge of town. Tom didn't describe the infected in detail. He didn't need to. The way his voice went tight when he said, "They don't stop," told me everything. That night we made camp on a small bench above a creek, hidden by alder and ferns. We didn't make a fire. The wet would have made it hard anyway. But the bigger reason was light. Light brings attention. We ate cold food, peanut butter on crackers, an apple split 3 ways, a handful of trail mix. It was not enough, but it was something, and it made us feel human. Tom insisted on a basic check. Hands, forearms, neck, any bites, any scratches that looked like they came from teeth. It was awkward, but in a world where infection meant transformation, awkward was a small price. We were clean. We slept in shifts without calling it that. Tom stayed up first, sitting against a tree with his rifle across his lap. I lay in my rain gear, staring into darkness, listening to the forest breathe. Around 2 a.m., I heard something moving below us near the water. Not a deer, not a raccoon, too heavy. Tom's head lifted, alert. June sat up, eyes wide. The movement came closer, slow and dragging, and then a shape emerged near the creek, human-sized, stumbling, head tilted. Then another, then another. 3. They wandered along the waterline like moths drawn to moisture, not looking up, not scanning. But they were close enough that if we sneezed, they might turn. Tom held up one finger, then pointed to the left, meaning, stay still, don't move. My heart hammered. June's breath hitched, but she clamped her mouth shut with both hands, tears shining in her eyes. The 3 infected drifted past beneath us, their shapes blotting the dim grey of creek mist, and for 10 minutes we didn't move at all. When they were gone, the forest seemed to exhale. Tom leaned close and whispered, "They follow sound, sometimes, not always, but sound helps." I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. In the morning, we moved again. We followed the ridges, aiming for a place Tom had heard about years ago from a search and rescue volunteer. An old Forest Service Guard cabin near the Bogachiel River, maintained sometimes, forgotten other times. It wasn't a bunker, it wasn't fortified, but it was a roof, a door, and a chance to regroup. Cabins are risky, I told him as we walked. People think the same thing. Tom didn't disagree, but people can't live in the rain forever. That was the truth. Hypothermia doesn't care if the world is ending. By the 3rd day, my body felt like it had been filled with wet sand. My shoulders ached from the pack straps. My boots were never fully dry. We kept moving because stopping felt more dangerous than exhaustion. We crossed old logging spurs choked with alder. We skirted a washout where the road had collapsed into a ravine, the earth torn open like a wound. We saw evidence of the collapse everywhere, abandoned cars on a distant road, smoke columns far to the east that didn't look like campfires, and once, a helicopter moving low over the trees before vanishing toward the coast. Tom stopped when we heard it, watching the sky with an expression I couldn't read. "Rescue?" June asked, hope cracking her voice. Tom didn't answer right away. "Could be. Could be military," I said. Tom glanced at me. "Or it could be someone trying to run. Hope is dangerous because it makes you reckless. We didn't chase it." Late that afternoon, we found the cabin. It sat back from the river on a small rise, half hidden by spruce. The roof was metal, dulled by years. The walls were rough wood, stained dark by rain. There was a porch with a broken chair and a stack of old split rounds under an overhang. A small window faced the river, glass intact but fogged. It looked like safety. It looked like a trap. We approached silently, spreading out the way Tom had learned in rescue work. One person covering, one person moving. He kept his rifle ready. I carried my hatchet. June stayed behind a tree, eyes darting. Tom tested the door handle. Locked. He leaned close to the door, listening. No movement inside. I walked the perimeter, checking windows, looking for prints, broken branches, signs of recent use. There were old tracks in mud, softened by rain, but nothing sharp and fresh. The woodpile had been disturbed, some rounds missing, but the cuts looked old, no smell of smoke, no trash. "It might be empty," I whispered. Tom nodded and reached into his pack. He pulled out a small pry bar, simple, practical, the kind of tool that always finds a purpose. He slid it into the door seam and applied steady pressure. The lock gave, with a dull snap. Tom pushed the door open slowly. The air inside was stale but not rotten, a faint scent of old wood and dust. The cabin was one room, with 2 bunks, a small table, and a cast-iron stove in the corner. There were shelves with a few battered cans, beans, soup, so old that the labels had faded. A stack of firewood sat near the stove, dry under the roof. Tom exhaled. "Okay." June stepped inside and immediately sat on the lower bunk like her legs had finally been allowed to stop. I closed the door behind us and slid the deadbolt. Half metal, half wish. We checked everything. Under bunks, behind shelves, the small back storage closet. No one. Then we did what tired humans do when they find 4 walls. We started making it ours. Tom's first priority was water. The river was close, but the Bogachiel runs cold and fast, and it carries silt and debris. We set up a simple system. I collected water in a pot from the river, ran it through my filter into a second container, then treated it with tablets and waited the required time. In a world full of new threats, old rules still mattered. Next was heat. We lit the stove carefully, using dry kindling and 1 match. Smoke curled up the chimney. The warmth that spread through the cabin felt like a miracle. June cried quietly when her hands stopped shaking. That night, with the stove humming and the rain tapping the roof, we talked in normal voices for the first time in days. Tom told us what he'd seen in Port Angeles, but he kept it measured, like reporting a call. People stumbling, then attacking, then not responding to pain the way they should. He said the emergency dispatch channels filled up and then went silent. He said the hospital called for help and then stopped answering. He said he'd seen a man stand up after being hit by a car and keep coming. "It spreads fast," he said. "Faster than anything I've ever seen." June stared at her hands. "Is it everywhere?" Tom looked at the stove, the flames reflecting his eyes. "I don't know." I thought about Seattle, about Nadia's cousin, about how a rumor had become a man in a hoodie walking into bear spray like it was nothing. "It's big," I said. "If it's in Port Angeles, it's not just one town." Silence settled. In the morning, we set rules. Tom was good at this. He didn't make it dramatic. He made it practical. No one goes outside alone. No fires during daylight unless needed. Smoke can be seen. No loud noise unless necessary. We keep packs ready at all times. We mark a rally point if we get separated. A big cedar with a lightning scar about 200 yards uphill. We keep track of food like it matters, because it does. June listened, absorbing. She wanted structure. Structure was something you could hold. I contributed where I could. I knew the forest, the way weather moved, the way trails connected. I knew how to make a simple rain catch off the cabin roof using a tarp and cord. I knew how to split wood efficiently without wasting energy. I knew what mushrooms not to touch and which berries could keep you alive. Over the next week, the cabin became a thin line between us and the world. The infected came by twice. The first time was 3 days after we arrived. We heard them before we saw them, branches snapping near the river. Tom and I looked through the window. A cluster of 5 shapes stumbled along the bank, drawn by the sound of water or the scent of something we couldn't understand. They moved slowly, bumping into trees, then correcting, like broken compasses. We stayed silent. The stove was cold. We held our breath. They drifted past and disappeared downstream. June trembled for an hour afterward. The second time was worse. It was raining hard, sheets of water, visibility low. Tom was on the porch, hood up, collecting rainwater off the tarp into a bucket. I was inside, splitting kindling. June was at the table, writing in a notebook she'd found, maybe trying to anchor herself to something. Then Tom froze. I saw it through the window, his shoulders stiffening, his head turning. I dropped the hatchet and moved to the door. Careful. Tom didn't come inside. He slowly backed toward the door, one hand reaching behind him for the knob without looking, the other hand lifted in a signal for me to stay quiet. I eased the door open just enough to hear. A sound came from the trees to the left of the cabin. Wet footsteps, fast, closer than we'd ever let them get. Not one, many. Tom's eyes met mine, wide and sharp. He whispered, barely moving his lips, "Inside, now." He slipped in. I closed the door softly and slid the bolt. We went to the window. Shapes moved between trees like shadows in rain, more than 10, maybe 15. They weren't wandering lazily like before. They were converging. Toward us, my stomach dropped. "Why?" June whispered, voice thin. Tom's jaw worked. We made noise. Or they smelled the firewood. Or... He stopped, listening. From somewhere in the woods behind them, faint but clear, came a human scream. Not close, but not far. Then another. The infected responded like magnets turning toward metal. Their heads tilted, their bodies shifted, and they started moving faster, not toward the river now, but toward the sound. They passed near the cabin, close enough that we could hear their wet breathing through the walls. One stopped at the porch steps. I saw its face through the Rain Street window. A man, older, with a grey beard, his skin waxy, his eyes vacant. He looked at the cabin door like it was an idea he couldn't quite solve. Then he lifted his head and made that low, wet noise again. June's hand clamped on my sleeve so hard it hurt. Tom raised the rifle, not pointing it at the man's head, but holding it ready, finger outside the trigger guard, a professional stance. He didn't want to fire. Noise would bring the whole group. The man took one step up onto the porch. The wood creaked. He paused. Then, as if the scream in the woods had finally reached whatever was left inside him, he turned and shuffled away, joining the others moving toward the sound. We stood frozen until the last shape disappeared. Then Tom exhaled through his nose, long and controlled. "People," he said quietly. "Someone's out there." June's eyes were huge. "We have to help them." Tom didn't answer immediately. He stared at the rain, calculating. I said what my gut said, even though it felt cruel. If we go out there, we might become the next sound. June looked at me like I'd slapped her. Tom finally spoke, voice heavy. "If they're close enough to scream, they're close enough to bring them back here. We can't chase. We can't." June's mouth opened, then closed. And I hated the forest for being indifferent. I hated it for forcing choices. That night, June didn't speak much. She sat on the bunk, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the stove. Tom sat beside her, not touching, just present. I lay on the other bunk and listened to the rain and tried not to imagine a stranger dying in the dark. In the days that followed, we made the cabin more defensible without turning it into a fortress fantasy. Realistic defenses in a forest aren't about building walls. They're about buying seconds. I drove nails through boards and set them across the inside of the lower window frames so they couldn't be pushed in easily. We stacked heavy furniture against the door at night, not because it would stop a determined crowd forever, but because it would slow them and make noise. Outside, we cleared brush around the cabin in a wide ring so anything approaching would have less cover. We left stumps and uneven ground, subtle obstacles that would trip someone moving without coordination. We set simple noise alarms, fishing lines strung between trees at knee height with empty cans tied to it. If something walked through, the cans would rattle, not foolproof, but better than silence. Tom showed June basic first aid skills, how to clean a cut properly, how to splint a wrist, how to recognize hypothermia. He spoke like he always did on calls, calm, methodical, never dramatic. I taught June how to use the map and compass, how to orient by ridgelines, how to follow water without letting it lead you into a canyon trap. She learned fast because she wanted to be useful, Fear is a teacher too. We rationed food. We fished with line in the river, not catching much, but enough to add protein. We foraged berries when we found them, edible greens, and once a patch of winter chanterelles that felt like finding hidden money. Still, we knew the truth. Winter was coming. On the Olympic Peninsula, winter in the woods is relentless. Rain turns to sleet, rivers rise, trails vanish under mud. If we stayed in that cabin long enough, we'd either run out of food or get trapped by weather. If we left, we'd risk roads, towns, people. We needed a better plan than hide until it's over, because it wasn't going to be over. The plan came from a radio. On the 8th day, I was outside adjusting the rain catch when I heard a faint, rhythmic chirp from inside the cabin. Not an alarm, not the fishing line cans, a radio squelch. Tom had a handheld two-way radio, a better one than my company unit, designed to reach farther. He'd been scanning channels every day, hoping for something coherent. This time, something came through clear enough to make words. Station, to any survivors, maintain distance. Do not approach population centers. Repeat, do not approach. Tom's head snapped up. He turned the volume higher. The voice was strained but steady. Male, speaking like someone reading off a script to keep panic from showing. It mentioned a temporary coordination point, and then a location that made all three of us stare at each other. Quileute Airport, Tom repeated, slow. Near La Push. That was real. That was close enough to reach in a day if roads weren't blocked. Quileute Airport is small, runways, a few buildings, coastal weather that shifts by the hour. Not a major military base, not a massive shelter, but it was a point of organization, which meant people, which meant supplies, communication, perhaps evacuation. June's face lit up like a candle. That's rescue. Tom didn't look convinced, but he looked alive in a way he hadn't since Port Angeles. Information is power, even if it's only a hint. I thought about the scream in the woods, about infected gathering towards sound, about how a crowd of frightened survivors could be both salvation and disaster. We need to verify, I said. Could be a trap, could be bad. Tom nodded. We go careful. June's hope didn't dim. We can't stay here forever. She was right. The cabin was a pause, not a future. So we prepared. We packed like professionals. Tom checked his medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers. A small oxygen mask he'd somehow grabbed. I checked our water gear, filter, tablets, containers. We divided food, so if one person got separated, they still had something. We kept our packs under 50 pounds because anything heavier becomes a slow death march. We left the cabin at first light, around 7:30 a.m., mist clinging to the trees. The forest felt different now, not just a place we hid, a place we were leaving. We moved fast but quiet, using logging spurs as much as possible to keep footing stable. Every time we came near an open stretch, we paused and listened. Every time we saw movement, our bodies tightened. Twice we spotted infected in the distance, lonely figures wandering near old roads, moving without purpose. We detoured wide. By late afternoon, we reached a ridge where the trees thinned enough to see the pale smear of the coastline in the distance. The smell of salt came faint on the wind, mixing with wet cedar. That should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like stepping closer to whatever the world had become. As we descended toward the lowlands near the coast, we found the first sign of real human presence. A discarded backpack torn open, scattered contents soaked into the mud, a broken phone, a child's jacket, no blood, no obvious horror, just abandonment. June stopped and stared. Tom picked up the phone, thumbed the screen, then shook his head. Dead. We keep moving, he said, but his voice was tighter now. A mile later, we found a car off the road. Door open, interior stripped. Another mile, we found a small cluster of vehicles blocking an intersection. 2 pickup trucks, a sedan, a delivery van. They weren't crashed, they were placed. A barricade. Tom held up a hand and we dropped into cover behind a berm of wet earth, peering through brush. There were people there, 3 men and 1 woman, all with rain gear, all holding weapons, rifles and shotguns, the kind you'd see in rural Washington anyway, except now they were held with intent. They had strung wire between vehicles and hung reflective tape like warning flags. A plastic sign, hand-lettered, read, "Turn around, no entry." June whispered, "We should talk to them." Tom's eyes were on their hands, their posture. We approached slow, hands visible, no surprises. We stepped out carefully, moving into the open with our hands away from pockets. One of the men raised his rifle immediately. "Stop right there." Tom lifted his hands. "We're not looking for trouble. We heard a broadcast about Quileute Airport." The woman's head snapped toward him. "You heard it too?" Tom nodded. "We've been in the woods. We're trying to get there." The man with the rifle didn't lower it. "Airport's not safe. Nothing's safe." June took a half step forward. "But they said—" The man cut her off. "They say a lot. People go there and don't come back." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The woman answered, voice sharp. "We're what's left of a neighborhood. We're keeping this road closed because last time we didn't. A group came through, dragging infected behind them like a wake." Tom's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. "How far is the airport?" "Couple miles," she said, "if you're lucky." "And if we're not?" The man finally lowered the rifle a fraction, not friendly, just less immediate. "If you're not lucky, you'll hear them before you see them, and you'll wish you stayed in the trees." Tom nodded once, acknowledging the honesty. "Is there another way?" I asked. The woman gestured toward the left. "Old service road. It's rough, goes around the lowlands. Fewer people, more woods. If you're smart, you'll stay off the main approach." June looked between them, frustrated. "Why don't you come with us?" The woman's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Because we've got people behind us. Kids, old folks. We're not chasing radio promises." Tom exhaled. "Understood." We didn't linger. We took the service road they indicated, a rutted track that dove into thicker trees and mud. My boots sank. The pack straps cut into my shoulders. But the road kept us away from the visible chaos of the main route. As dusk approached, the wind shifted and carried sound. Faint shouting, then a low, rising chorus of noises that made my skin tighten. Not animal, not wind. A crowd. Tom stopped and crouched. He looked at June, then at me. "We camp here. We don't walk into that in the dark." June opened her mouth to argue, then closed it when another wave of distant noise rolled through the trees. We found a concealed spot, tucked under a stand of spruce, and settled in without fire. We ate silently. In the darkness, the distant sounds continued, shouts, then sudden silence, then movement again. The airport wasn't a clean rescue beacon. It was a magnet, and magnets pull everything, good and bad. In the morning, we moved before sunrise. Around 6:30 a.m., mist thick enough to hide us. The service road brought us to a rise where we could finally see the airport area through gaps in trees. Quileute Airport sat on flat ground near the river mouth, surrounded by wet fields and low scrub. In normal times, it would have looked quiet, small, almost quaint. Now it looked tense. I could see people moving, small groups, some carrying packs, some standing guard. I could see vehicles clustered near buildings, some positioned like barriers. I could see smoke from a controlled fire, thin and steady. Then I saw the other movement. Beyond the perimeter, farther out, near the tree line, shapes drifting, clustering, wandering. Infected. Not dozens, more. June whispered, barely audible. "Oh my God." Tom's face was stone. "We don't walk straight in." He was right. We needed a way to approach without becoming the next problem. We backed off into the trees and circled, using the edge of the field and the cover of brush. We looked for a side approach, a gap in perimeter, a place where guards could see us before fear made them fire. We found a small footbridge over a drainage ditch, half hidden by reeds. 2 men stood nearby in rain gear with rifles slung low. They looked exhausted, eyes scanning constantly. Tom stepped out first, hands high. "Friendly," he called, not shouting, just loud enough to carry. "3 people, coming in from the woods." The guards snapped alert, rifles coming up, but not fully aimed. One of them shouted back, "Stop, stay there." We stopped. Tom spoke calmly. "We heard your broadcast. We're not sick. We have supplies and skills. I'm a paramedic." The guard hesitated. The word paramedic still meant something. Skills were currency now. A woman approached from behind them, older, wearing a reflective vest with something printed on it that looked like an emergency management logo. She carried a clipboard, paper, real paper, and her hair was tucked under a cap. She looked at us like she'd been doing this all day and wished she wasn't. "Any bites?" she called. "No," Tom said. "We can show you." She nodded sharply. "One at a time, hands visible. You follow instructions exactly." We did. They brought us through a narrow entry point between stacked baggage carts and a pickup truck. They kept distance. They checked us for injuries, for fever, for scratches. They asked where we'd been. Tom told the truth, concise. The woman with the clipboard introduced herself as Marlene Shu, a county emergency coordinator. She looked like someone who had been handed responsibility and had decided to carry it, whether she wanted it or not. "We have a perimeter," she said, voice flat. "It holds until it doesn't. We have a radio relay set up with a generator. We have limited food. We have water from wells and treated river intake. We have sick people we can't fully help. We have people who won't follow rules." June swallowed. "Is there evacuation?" Marlene's eyes flicked toward the runway, where a small plane sat, door open, as if waiting. There was, not right now. Fuel is limited. Airspace is complicated. We're focusing on keeping this place functioning as long as we can. Tom asked the question I was thinking. Why broadcast at all then? Marlene's expression tightened. Because people were coming anyway. Better to have them come with some structure than to have them crash into fences at night and bring infected with them. That made brutal sense. We were assigned a corner of a hangar with other new arrivals, cots, blankets, a line for water, a line for food, a small triage area where Tom immediately offered to help, and where Marlene accepted without hesitation. I watched Tom step into purpose like a man putting on a familiar jacket. He spoke to people quietly, checked wounds, cleaned cuts, made calm decisions. June stayed near him at first, then slowly began helping, handing supplies, fetching water, learning. I didn't have medical skills, but I had something else. I knew how to build small systems, how to make water flow where it needed to, how to make a barrier that slowed movement, how to read terrain. Marlene noticed. She asked what I did. I explained. An hour later, I was outside with a small team. 2 exhausted volunteers and a guy named Luis Ortega, who said he'd been a maintenance supervisor at a hotel in Sequim, working on reinforcing the perimeter with what we had. Pallets, fencing, old signage, and vehicles positioned to create choke points. We weren't building a fortress, we were building time. Time to see, time to react, time to run. By the 3rd day at the airport, the truth of the situation became clear in layers. The broadcast had drawn survivors, yes, but it had also drawn trouble. A group arrived in a stolen truck, loud, demanding entry, claiming to have supplies, then refusing to be checked for bites. When guards held them at gunpoint, the group backed off, only to circle around later and try to sneak in through the reeds. The infected followed their noise like shadows. We stopped them, barely. That night, the perimeter faced the largest push yet. It started with sound, distant, low, like 100 feet shuffling through wet grass. Then shapes emerged from the tree line and the field, clustering toward the fence line, as if the light and voices inside the airport were a beacon. People panicked. Someone fired too early. The crack of gunfire rolled across the runway, and the field answered with more movement. The infected surged, not sprinting like movie monsters, but moving with relentless forward pressure. Bodies piling into barriers, pushing, toppling, creating momentum out of sheer mass. I was on a section of perimeter near a line of pallets when the first one reached the barrier and began climbing without understanding. It was climbing. Hands scrabbled at wood. Feet found purchase. It didn't feel pain, didn't hesitate. Luis beside me muttered, voice tight, "This is not happening." Tom was somewhere in triage. June was inside the hangar, probably helping Marlene keep people from stampeding. I gripped a long-handled fire axe someone had handed me earlier, not because I wanted to use it, but because holding something solid kept my hands from shaking. A guard shouted, "Hold the line! Don't waste ammo!" They used rifles in controlled bursts, not spraying. Shots were counted because ammunition was finite. When a few infected breached the outer pallets, people fell back to the second line. Vehicles positioned as a tighter corridor. I saw one infected stumble through a gap, arms reaching. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. Panic makes people trip. A young man ran backward, eyes wide, and slipped on wet grass. The infected closed the distance. Luis and I moved without talking. Luis hooked the man under the arm and hauled him up with a grunt. I stepped between them and the infected, raised the axe not like a weapon, but like a barrier. The infected grabbed at the air, hands scraping my jacket sleeve. The contact felt wrong, cold, and urgent. I shoved hard with the axe handle, knocking it back. It fell, then immediately tried to rise again. A guard behind me fired once, close range, controlled. The infected dropped and didn't rise. My ears rang. I didn't feel heroic. I felt sick, not from gore or horror, just from the simple fact that survival now included moments like that. We held the line that night, but barely, and the cost wasn't just ammunition. It was morale. Every person at the airport understood something new. This place could fall. And if it fell, it wouldn't fall slowly. The next morning, Marlene called a meeting. Not everyone, just people with skills and roles. Tom, me, Luis, a few guards, a radio operator named Callie Brooks who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Marlene didn't waste words. We can't keep drawing them here. The broadcast was necessary to gather, but continuing to broadcast is pulling in infected and desperate groups. We need options. Callie rubbed her eyes. If we stop broadcasting, we lose contact with other pockets. Tom said, we also stop advertising our location. Marlene nodded. We're going quiet soon. Before we do, we need to decide what we are, a permanent camp or a staging point, because a permanent camp becomes a siege. I felt the weight of that word, siege. In the woods, you can move, you can hide, you can choose terrain. In a camp, the terrain chooses you. We need a fallback, I said. My voice surprised me, calm amid the tension. A place not as visible, higher ground, less open field. Marlene's eyes landed on me. Like what? I thought about maps, about ridgelines, about old fire lookouts and radio relay stations, about places built to see far and stay small. There's an old Forest Service lookout, I said. Not too far from here. Not easy to reach by vehicle, but reachable on foot with gear. It's elevated, with a view. It could be a small relay point, not for everyone, but for a core group maybe. Callie looked up. If it's high enough, I can bounce radio better. Tom leaned forward. How many people could it hold? Not many, I admitted. Maybe a dozen comfortably, more if you're willing to suffer. Marlene's jaw tightened. We have more than a dozen worth saving. Silence. This was the real problem. Every plan that saved some people abandoned others, and no one wanted to be the person who said it out loud. Tom finally spoke, voice quiet. We can't save everyone if we get wiped out. We need continuity. A group that can keep communication alive, keep skills alive, so there's something left to rebuild with. June, standing near the door, whispered, That sounds like choosing. Tom looked at her, pain in his eyes. It is choosing. The world is forcing choices. Marlene exhaled, a slow release of tension. We do both, she said. We reduce our footprint here. We keep a smaller perimeter. We stop broadcasting wide and we send a team to establish that lookout as a secondary point. Supplies, radio, medical, a place to run if this collapses. Her gaze moved around the room, landing on each of us. Mercer, you lead the terrain side. Callie, you handle comms. Tom, you handle medical. Luis, logistics. Luis blinked. Me? Marlene's mouth twitched. You're the only one who knows how to keep a generator alive without praying. Luis didn't smile. He just nodded. And just like that, my life became a mission again. Not for a company report. Not for a paycheck. For survival. We spent 2 days preparing quietly. We scavenged supplies, a portable radio set, extra batteries, fuel siphoned carefully from abandoned vehicles, tarps, rope, canned food, a small solar panel setup someone had brought and guarded like gold. We packed medical supplies. We packed tools. We packed a hand-cranked weather radio because redundancy is life when systems fail. On the morning we left, the sky was low and grey, the kind of day the peninsula wears like a permanent coat. June insisted on coming. Tom tried to argue. It's risky. June's chin lifted. I'm not staying here waiting. If this place falls, I want to be with you. Tom looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting what he couldn't change. Our team was 6. Me, Tom, June, Callie, Luis, and a quiet former Coast Guard guy named Hank Dwyer, who'd become one of the best perimeter watchers because he never stopped scanning. We left the airport around 8 a.m., slipping out through the reeds and into the woods, avoiding the main road. Marlene watched from the hangar door as we went. Her face gave nothing away, but her hands were clenched around her clipboard like it was a lifeline. The woods swallowed us quickly. The airport noise faded. The air smelled like wet leaves and salt. And as we climbed away from the flatlands and the magnet of people, I felt something I hadn't felt since that first day at the creek. Space. Not safety, not peace, but space to think. The trail to the lookout was steep, muddy, and narrow in places. Fallen trees forced detours. We moved in a line, careful, quiet, stopping often to listen. The infected were less common in dense forest than near roads and open areas, but they were still there, scattered like ash after a fire. We saw one alone on a ridge, standing still as if listening to the wind. We circled wide. We saw 2 more near a creek crossing, wandering aimlessly. We waited motionless until they drifted away. Callie asked once, voice low, "Do you think they get tired?" Hank answered without looking back. "They stop moving sometimes. That doesn't mean tired." By late afternoon, we reached the base of the Lookout's hill. A long climb up a spine of rock and trees. The structure itself was visible through the canopy. A small square cabin on stilts, perched above the treetops, with a wraparound catwalk. It looked fragile. It also looked like a lighthouse. We approached cautiously, scanning for signs of occupation. At the base, a wooden ladder climbed to the platform. The hatch above was closed. Luis whispered, "If someone's up there, they've seen us coming for a while." Tom nodded. "We announce." I called up, voice steady. "Hello, we're survivors from Quileute. We're not looking for trouble." Silence. Then a scrape. The hatch opened a few inches, and a face appeared. Thin, dirty, eyes sharp. A woman, maybe 35, hair chopped short, holding a shotgun pointed downward but ready. "Don't come up," she said. Tom lifted his hands again, the universal gesture of peace. "We're not here to take your place. We're here to set up a relay. We can trade." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Trade what?" "Medical," Tom said. "Food, batteries, information." The woman hesitated, then opened the hatch fully and leaned out. "Information first." Callie stepped forward. "We have a functioning radio at the airport. Limited. We're going quiet soon. We're building a fallback." The woman's gaze flicked over all of us, assessing. "Airport's going to fall." No question in her voice, just certainty. "Maybe," I said, "but we're trying to make sure something survives even if it does." The woman studied me. Then she gave a short nod toward the ladder. One at a time, slow. We climbed. Up there, the world opened. The view from the lookout was wide enough to make my chest ache. An endless sea of green broken by rivers and grey patches of sky. The coastline a distant line, and beyond it the ocean, flat and unforgiving. Smoke rose in thin columns far to the east. Somewhere down in the folds of forest, the airport sat invisible, small, vulnerable. The woman introduced herself as Raina Patel. She'd been a wildfire lookout contractor in the summers and had stayed on after the collapse because she knew this place, and because going down meant dealing with roads, people, and crowds. "This is my refuge," she said bluntly. "I'm not sharing it with 20 strangers." Marlene had been right. Not everyone could be saved in one place. "We're not bringing 20, Tom said. "Just enough to keep a relay. We can leave you alone most of the time." Raina watched him. "And when you run out of food?" Luis answered, practical. "Then we move again. This is a node, not a town." Raina's eyes lingered on June, who looked small against the vast view. "How old are you?" 20, June said, chin lifted. Raina's expression softened a fraction, then hardened again. "This world doesn't care." June didn't look away. "Neither do I anymore." That, oddly, seemed to earn Raina's respect. We spent the next 2 days turning the lookout into a functioning relay point. Callie set up the radio gear, running antenna wire properly, checking connections, labeling frequencies in a notebook so anyone could use them. She explained every setting out loud, like teaching a class, because panic makes people forget. Luis checked a small generator stored in a shed below the lookout. Old, but usable. He cleaned the spark plug, checked fuel lines, and tested it in short bursts to conserve fuel. He explained the basics to me and Hank. Run it only when necessary. Store fuel sealed. Keep it dry. Avoid long continuous use because overheating kills engines faster than time does. Tom organized medical supplies into categories: bleeding control, infection prevention, pain management, hydration. He set up a small corner as a triage point, even though the word felt absurd up here. I focused on the physical defenses. Again, not fortress walls, but time-buying systems. We reinforced the hatch with additional wood bracing from spare lumber. We set up noise lines around the base with cans and cord. We cleared the immediate area so nothing could approach unseen. Raina watched all of it, arms folded, like a homeowner watching contractors. On the third night, Callie got a transmission from the airport. Marlene's voice came through, faint but clear enough to understand. "Relay team, this is Quilayute coordination. Situation deteriorating. Increase pressure on perimeter. We're shifting to quiet mode. Repeat, shifting to quiet mode. Maintain listening watch. Respond only to direct contact. Over." Callie swallowed. "Understood," she said into the mic. "We're here. We're operational. Over." The radio hissed. Then Marlene's voice again, quieter now, like she'd leaned closer to the mic. "If you can, keep it alive. People will need something to find. Out." The transmission ended. Silence filled the lookout, heavy as wet wool. June's eyes were glossy. "They're going to fall." Tom put a hand on her shoulder at last. A small contact in a big world. Maybe not today. But we all felt it. The airport was a dam holding back water. Water always finds a way. That night, I stood on the catwalk with rain misting my face and looked out at the darkness. The forest below was a black sea. The distant glow near the coast was faint, like a campfire of civilization trying to stay lit. I thought about Forks, about Nadia, about my truck, about the man in the hoodie walking through bear spray like a ghost. And I realized something that made my throat tighten. The woods hadn't saved me because it was kind. The woods had saved me because it was indifferent. It didn't invite crowds. It didn't create jams. It didn't funnel people into panic. It just existed, wet, cold, vast, and hard. And if you could match its hardness with your own, you could live. Below us, somewhere out there, the infected wandered like broken machinery. Somewhere else, people fought over scraps and fences. Up here, we were a thin signal in a dark world, a small point of order that might matter to someone later. I wrapped my hands around the cold railing and listened. In the distance, far beyond the trees, the faint echo of shouting rose and fell like waves. Then, after a long time, it faded, and the forest, as always, did not care. But I did, and that was enough to keep me standing. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.